juggling three jobs, a broken dream, and her 7-year-old daughter sketching a restaurant they can't afford. And in just 5 minutes, what began as a silent encounter between strangers erupts into a turning point that shatters everything Jasmine thought she knew about policy, justice, and power, until she does the unimaginable. She rewrites Tanya's life with her own hands. How will Tanya's life change from here? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The rain wasn't just falling, it was slicing through the Washington, D.C. air like glass. Neon lights from the rundown gas station flickered in red and blue, reflecting off the slick pavement like blood and bruises smeared across the street. A black government SUV rolled in, engine humming low, its headlights piercing the mist. Jasmine Crockett sat behind the wheel, her sharp eyes scanning the station like a battlefield. She had just left Capitol Hill after a grueling 11-hour hearing on systemic poverty, where her words had been sliced, twisted, and ignored by men in $1,000 suits. Her blazer clung to her skin, damp from the rain and sweat of battle. She stepped out into the cold, heels clicking against the concrete, her breath visible in the air, controlled but sharp. She wasn't just tired, she was scorched by fatigue, the kind only injustice could cause. And just as she reached for the pump, she saw her, Tanya. Tanya looked like she had been dropped into a war zone without armor. 7 months pregnant, her swollen belly pressed against a faded gray uniform soaked through at the sleeves. She darted from car to car, lifting windshield wipers with trembling fingers, dragging 5-gallon fuel canisters across slick concrete like they were body bags. Her boots were worn down, soles separating, laces soaked and frayed. No gloves, no raincoat, just raw skin cracking in the cold. Each time she bent to check a tire's pressure, she winced, hand instinctively gripping her lower back as if trying to hold her own spine in place. No one looked at her. Not the drivers, not the customers, not the camera across the street mounted to a lamppost. To them, she was invisible labor, another forgotten body trying not to drown in America's quiet flood. But not to Jasmine. She saw it all, and she didn't blink. And just when Jasmine thought she had seen the full weight of injustice pressing down on one woman's back, her eyes caught something even heavier. A child waiting in the shadows of sacrifice, dreaming on scraps while the world looked away. Under the ragged metal awning at the far end of the station, where the rain still found its way through the rusted seams, Lila sat curled on a flimsy plastic chair. The chair wobbled with every shift of her weight, one leg uneven on the cracked concrete, but she sat perfectly still, balanced by quiet determination. Her coat was threadbare, 2 sizes too small, the sleeves stopping well above her wrists, exposing chapped, reddened skin. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but from the cold, and yet she gripped her sketchbook like it was the last piece of something solid in a world of things falling apart. The sketchbook was falling apart too. Its spine had come loose, the pages curling from rain and age, and the corners were soft like cloth from being turned over and over again. But inside it, she had carved something sacred. Lila wasn't doodling. She wasn't just killing time. Her hand moved like she knew exactly what she wanted to build. A stove with thick burners, a counter where customers would lean and laugh, a chalkboard menu scrawled with something she couldn't yet spell, but believed in with all her might. The lines were jagged, pressed hard, as if she was trying to etch the dream deep enough to survive the night. She had only 3 pencils, one red, one yellow, one blue, all worn down to the nibs, held together with mismatched rubber bands. Each stroke she made with them was careful, slow, defiant, as if she were saying to the world, "You may have taken everything from us, but you will not take this." Jasmine approached slowly, as if walking into a church. Her heels clicked once, then softened, her breath steadying as she crouched down beside the girl. The fluorescent lights flickered above them, casting a pale hue on Layla's face, thin, smudged with rain and dirt, but utterly focused. "Hey there," Jasmine said, voice low, sincere, respectful. "What are you drawing?" Lila didn't look up at first. She finished shading the outline of an oven with her red pencil, then glanced sideways at the woman crouching beside her. Her voice came out like a leaf breaking off a tree. "My mama's restaurant," she whispered. "She said one day she'll open it." She paused, then added, not bitter but heartbreakingly matter-of-fact. "But right now, she just cooks at home." Those 9 words landed like a punch to the chest. But right now, she just cooks at home. Jasmine didn't move. Couldn't. The gas pump kept clicking in the distance. Tanya's footsteps slapped against the concrete in the background. But all Jasmine could see in that moment was this child, drawing a restaurant her mother had never stepped foot in because life had buried the blueprint under rent, labor, and abandonment. This wasn't just about food. It wasn't about ovens or menus. It was about dignity, legacy, and a girl fighting to resurrect a dream her mother no longer had time to believe in. Jasmine looked down at the drawing again. The pencil marks were smudged, imperfect, untrained, but they were alive. They were urgent. They were real. And in that quiet, flickering corner of a forgotten gas station, surrounded by cold metal and indifferent traffic, something began to burn inside her. Not anger, not pity, something older, something ancestral, a knowing, a vow. This can't be all there is. And as Jasmine stood there, staring at that fragile dream drawn in colored pencil, something inside her refused to stay still. Because behind every child's quiet hope is a mother carrying the weight of silence, of sacrifice, of all the dreams she was forced to bury alive. She straightened, exhaling into the cold air, her fingers still tingling from the sharp recognition of injustice, the kind that didn't make headlines, the kind that didn't wear a villain's face. It was quieter than that, more cowardly. It showed up in eviction notices, silent shrugs, and broken promises. She turned her gaze back to the woman moving like a soldier under the assault of poverty. Shoulders hunched not from fear, but from fatigue that no one ever bothered to name. Tanya stood at pump 4, struggling with a rusted nozzle that kept jamming. Her arms trembled slightly as she tried to force the lever down, her belly brushing against the cold metal of the gas tank. Her sweatshirt was soaked through, and the blue of her uniform shirt clung to her skin like a second punishment. Jasmine approached her with quiet intention, but Tanya sensed her presence before she spoke. She turned sharply, startled, eyes wide, calculating. For a brief second, Tanya's posture changed. She straightened, forced a tired smile onto her face, and wiped her hands on a ragged towel tucked into her waistband. "Hi there," she said quickly, her voice thin, trying to sound upbeat. "Sorry, I'll be right with you. Just got this one acting up on me. The pump sensor's been glitching since Monday." She laughed nervously, glancing at Jasmine's tailored coat, the polished gleam of her shoes. "You're probably from corporate, right? Or media? I swear I'm following policy. Just a little behind tonight with the rain and all." Jasmine held her gaze, then shook her head slowly. "I'm not here to inspect anything," she said, her tone even but edged with something deeper. "I just wanted to talk. You look like someone who's been carrying too much alone." Tanya blinked, twice, as if no one had spoken to her like that in a long time. Maybe ever. Her shoulders dropped slightly, a guard she didn't even realize she'd raised beginning to slip. "Well, caring's kind of the theme these days," she muttered, pressing a hand gently to her side. "One here." She glanced at her belly. "And one over there." Her eyes flicked toward Lila, still seated under the awning, now trying to keep her pages dry by shielding them with her back. "She's your daughter?" Jasmine asked softly. Tanya nodded. 7 going on 17, sharp as a tack. Been my shadow since she could walk." Her voice carried pride, but behind it was something else. A fracture, a fatigue too deep for words. "Where's her father?" Jasmine asked, not unkindly. Tanya let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Somewhere far away from gas stations and real life, I imagine." She paused, then added, "He left when I told him I was pregnant again. Said he couldn't do it a second time. That one child was already too much and he wasn't cut out for more." Her voice caught on that word. More, like it meant baggage, like it meant burden. "He packed a bag, walked out the front door, and that was that." Jasmine said nothing. The rain did all the talking for a moment, tapping against the pump, the awning, the metal bones of a city too big to notice the ones it's failing. "I'm sorry," Jasmine finally said. Tanya shook her head. "Don't be. He's not the first man to run, and he won't be the last. What I didn't expect was how fast everything else would fall apart after he left, like he was holding the last nail in the floorboard, and when he left, the whole damn house came loose. The words came faster now, not because she wanted sympathy, but because she needed to let them out before they crushed her from the inside. I started picking up extra shifts, cleaning offices in the early mornings, doing gas here at night. Weekends, I cook for a catering company that pays cash under the table. 3 jobs, no breaks, no backup, no childcare either, so Lila comes with me when I can't find anyone. People give me looks sometimes like I'm crazy or irresponsible. But what am I supposed to do? Leave her home alone? Quit work and starve? Her tone sharpened, not at Jasmine, but at a world that dared to call her reckless for surviving. I wake up every day knowing I can't afford to be sick, or late, or tired. I sleep with my phone under my pillow in case one of the jobs calls. I plan meals around what's on clearance. I wash Lila's clothes in the sink when I don't have quarters for the laundromat. And I patch her shoes with glue and tape because she's growing too fast and I'm not making enough. She stopped herself, taking a breath that sounded like it was being filtered through gravel. Then she looked Jasmine dead in the eye, her voice lower now. But the thing that stings the most? I had a way out once. Jasmine tilted her head. What kind of way out? Tanya's face changed. The hardness cracked, revealing something more fragile. Regret. I was studying culinary arts at the Southeast Community Center. It wasn't fancy, but it was good. I had a knack for spices, balancing flavors. My instructors told me I had something special, that if I stayed with it, I could get placed in a real kitchen, maybe even apply for an accelerator grant. She paused. But then I found out I was pregnant with Lila. And you know how that goes. Morning sickness turned into missed classes. Missed classes turned into withdrawal warnings. I tried to keep up, brought my books to doctor's appointments, even cooked test recipes in my apartment's broken oven. But eventually it all slipped. Couldn't keep up, couldn't afford childcare, and no one wants a student who might go into labor before midterms. Her lips twisted into a smile that had nothing to do with joy. So I dropped out, told myself I'd come back later. Her hands moved automatically now, wiping down the pump, coiling a fuel hose, small acts of control in a world that hadn't given her much. But later never comes when you're just trying to get through today. She glanced at Lila again, who was now rubbing her hands together for warmth, but still holding onto her sketchbook like it was oxygen. That's who I do this for. Every late shift, every sore back, every insult swallowed for a tip that barely buys a loaf of bread. It's all for her, so she doesn't end up like me. The wind howled around them as if it too was bearing witness. Jasmine swallowed hard. Her throat ached, not from pity, but fury. Fury at a system that paraded itself as equal opportunity, while women like Tanya bled into their uniforms under flickering lights, praying for a chance that never came. Fury at men who created children and walked away, leaving women to pay interest on every broken promise. Fury at a world that clapped for billionaires' charity while letting working mothers drown in the silence. She took a breath, but the fire in her chest didn't go out. It was just beginning to rise. And as Tanya's final words, "Later never comes when you're just trying to get through today," settled into the air like dust after a collapse, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't offer cliches or solutions. She simply stood still, letting the storm between them speak its truth. But she saw it, buried beneath the exhaustion, hidden behind cracked knuckles and a brave face, a flicker of something that refused to die. Not quite hope, something older, something wounded, something waiting. She spoke softly, but her words landed with precision. "If you had another chance," Jasmine asked, "a clean one. No judgment, no deadlines, just you and the road you didn't get to take. What would you do with it?" The question hovered like smoke. Tanya didn't answer right away. Her head tilted slightly as if she were listening for something inside herself. A voice long muted. Her hands dropped to her sides. Her shoulders didn't tense this time. They sagged. And then, with a kind of slow devastation, she let out a breath that had clearly been held for years. "I stopped thinking about chances," Tanya said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was hollow. too exhausted to carry rage, too bruised to carry longing. I used to imagine things, restaurants, menus, kitchens that smelled like garlic and basil, and something that belonged to me. Her eyes glassed over, not with tears, but with memory. When I was pregnant with Lila, I'd lie on the floor and draw out my dream kitchen. 6 burners, a double oven. I wanted an open counter where people could see their food being made. I wanted to cook the way my mother used to. Big meals, real food. Not the stuff you microwave and pretend is love. She looked down at her belly as her voice thinned. But when he left, everything changed. He didn't just take his clothes or his money, he took my compass. He took the idea that I could still dream and not be punished for it. Her jaw clenched slightly, and for the first time, Jasmine saw the tears. Not falling, but standing still in her eyes, waiting for permission to break. I stopped asking myself what I wanted. I started asking what would keep the lights on. What would make the rent? What would put shoes on my daughter's feet? She took a long breath. And somewhere in all that, I lost the right to dream. The words didn't need to be loud. They were heavier than thunder. Jasmine looked at her, really looked at her. And in that moment, the congresswoman didn't see a gas station attendant. She saw a woman exiled from her own potential, not by failure, not by laziness, but by circumstance, by abandonment, by a country that sold opportunity in brochures and then padlocked the door. And then, without warning, a whisper, so soft it almost vanished in the rain. "Mama?" Tanya turned, startled. Lila was standing there, sketchbook pressed tightly against her chest, red pencil tucked behind her ear like a fragile badge of honor. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her bangs stuck to her forehead. She looked up at her mother, not with confusion, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous: clarity. "If you can't dream it right now," Lila said, voice trembling, "I'll draw it for you." The silence that followed was unlike any Jasmine had known. It wasn't just emotional, it was sacred. Tanya didn't respond. She dropped to her knees slowly, as if her bones were made of glass. Her arms wrapped around her daughter without words, without sound. She held her tightly, pressing her face into the crown of Lila's head, breathing in the scent of rain, graphite, and something achingly pure. Because in that moment, something happened that no government program, no paycheck, no policy could ever replicate. A daughter handed her mother back a dream, and it was drawn in broken lines, with broken pencils, in the middle of a broken world. And Jasmine Crockett, seasoned, hardened, defiant, stood in the rain and felt her throat tighten. Not from sympathy, from recognition, from fury, from a vow that began as a whisper in her blood. This ends here. The rain hadn't stopped. It chased Jasmine through every turn of the DC streets, whispering like ghosts against the windshield. But her mind was somewhere far from the rhythm of traffic and red lights. Tanya's voice still echoed in her ears, raw, resigned, stripped of pretense. "I lost the right to dream." Jasmine had heard hundreds of testimonies and hearings, thousands of constituent pleas and letters. But this wasn't policy. It was blood, bone, breath. It was what failure looked like when it had a name, a daughter, and no one left to carry it but the woman who'd been left behind. And Jasmine couldn't unsee it. She didn't drive home. Instead, she turned off the main road and headed toward Capitol Hill, tires hissing through puddles like a warning. Her government badge granted her entry to the quiet federal building, but tonight she felt like an intruder in her own institution. The corridors were dim, echoing with the lonely hum of security lights. Her heels clicked with urgency against the marble floor, each step sharper than the last. By the time she reached her office, soaked to the skin and shivering with more than cold, she wasn't a congresswoman. She was a woman haunted by truth. The truth of a broken promise stamped insufficient funds by men who never knew the cost of a single missed meal. She flicked on the light. Papers still lay on her desk from earlier in the day. Budget proposals, subcommittee notes, meaningless platitudes printed on government letterhead. She shoved them aside, opened her laptop, typed faster than she had in weeks. She knew what she was looking for, and it didn't take long to find it. Archived under Committee Minutes, Subsection 4, B Women's Workforce Reintegration Program. Her fingers hovered before clicking. There it was. A spreadsheet. Cold, efficient, dehumanizing, line after line of names, applicants, all denied. Tanya Reed, application declined. Reason, funding reallocated. Priority, high-tech STEM apprenticeships. Jasmine's hands froze on the keyboard. Her stomach turned. The program Tanya had applied for was real. She hadn't imagined it. But it had been defunded in the 2023 omnibus, traded quietly in a deal to appease donors and claim bipartisan economic innovation. They had stripped funding for women like Tanya to free up tax breaks for defense tech startups. Jasmine remembered that night. The vote passed at 2:14 a.m., the room half empty. No debate, no public record. She had opposed it, but she hadn't fought hard enough. She stood, pushed the chair away, and paced the office. Rainwater still dripping from her coat. Her reflection in the window stared back, tired, angry, unwilling to pretend anymore. Her mouth tightened. They called it efficiency. I call it erasure. Because this wasn't just about Tanya. It was about the system that let her fall, the red tape that twisted survival into a numbers game, the grant programs that dangled hope and then vanished with the stroke of a pen, the smiling press conferences that talked about empowering women while quietly gutting every ladder out of poverty. Tanya wasn't a footnote. She was proof that the system didn't just fail people. It calculated their expendability. It buried their futures in budget lines and then asked them why they hadn't tried harder. Jasmine turned back to her desk. Her laptop was still glowing. She opened her personal contacts. Names, favors, numbers not listed in official government books. She drafted a message, then another, texted private donors, reached out to a nonprofit founder who owed her a favor, scanned her own campaign funds. She wouldn't touch taxpayer dollars, not for this, but her own salary, her personal savings, her connections. All of that was fair game now, because something inside her had shifted. She wasn't going to write a bill. She wasn't going to form a task force. She wasn't going to issue a press release or tweet a statistic. She was going to do something they didn't teach in law school or train for in hearings. She was going to help one woman, directly, quietly, immediately, and it wouldn't make headlines, but it would make a difference. And tonight, that was more than enough. The sun hadn't yet risen over Washington, but light was beginning to peel back the edges of a long, unforgiving night. The city, still damp from the hours of rain, looked half asleep, except for one corner of it, where a woman scrubbed windshields with a rag that barely held together. Tanya's motions were robotic now, the rhythm of survival embedded in her bones. Her fingers were raw, her shoulders slouched, and her uniform was still damp from the night before. Each time she lifted her arm, a dull ache radiated through her lower back. But there was no time to wince. The first car of the morning had just pulled in. The day was starting, and the world didn't pause for pain. She was wiping down the rearview mirror of an old Ford when she heard the engine. Not the usual growl of a rusted sedan or delivery van. This was smoother, controlled, deliberate. Tanya turned her head slowly, eyes narrowing as a black SUV, clean, polished, and unmistakably out of place, rolled into the station. Her breath caught. No one driving a car like that ever stopped here. They drove past, fast. They looked away. But this one slowed, parked. Driver's door opened, and out stepped Jasmine Crockett. She didn't walk like a politician today. There was no briefcase, no staff, no posture of command. There was only intention. In her hands were three things: a full-size professional art kit sealed in transparent wrapping, a sturdy grocery bag heavy with contents, and a plain white envelope, thick and pressed shut. And her eyes, when they met Tanya's, were not softened by pity. They were sharpened by resolve. Tanya froze, one hand still on the mirror. Her throat tightened. "You came back," she said, barely more than a breath. Jasmine gave a single nod. "I said I would." The quiet between them was electric. Tanya didn't move. She wasn't sure she could. Every instinct in her body told her this wasn't real, that maybe she was imagining it, that people in suits didn't show up 2 days in a row unless something was wrong. Jasmine broke the silence by stepping forward, holding out the art kit first. "For your daughter," she said. "It's everything she's been trying to create with broken pencils and soaked pages. She shouldn't have to fight just to draw a dream." Tanya took it gently, eyes fixed on the case like it might vanish in her hands. The color sets glowed behind the plastic. Reds, blues, metallics, chalk pastels, brushes, graphite sticks, blending tools. It looked like it belonged in an artist's studio, not in a gas station parking lot. Her voice cracked. "She's never had anything like this." Jasmine nodded, but didn't speak. She handed her the grocery bag next. Tanya could feel the weight of it immediately. Inside was not charity food. It was fresh. Arugula, tomatoes still on the vine, bread wrapped in butcher's paper, blocks of cheese, a small bottle of olive oil, even a sealed container of spice blends labeled in looping cursive. "You said you used to cook with your mother," Jasmine said. "This is so you can taste something that reminds you of that. Something made for flavor, not survival." Tanya held the bag against her chest, as though bracing herself for impact. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why are you doing this?" And then Jasmine held out the envelope. "This," she said slowly, "is your future." Tanya's hands hovered, unsure whether to reach for it. Jasmine stepped closer. "I made some calls. I asked for nothing in return. I just told the truth, that you're a woman who's fought harder than most, and you deserve a chance that doesn't come with a wait list or an apology." Tanya took the envelope with trembling fingers. She opened the seal with care, unfolding the papers inside. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Her hand rose to her mouth. "A full scholarship," Jasmine said steady, "to the Culinary Arts program at DC Community Training Center. Tuition paid, materials covered. Your name's on the registry. First class starts Monday." The silence between them was no longer soft. It was dense, charged, like the final breath before a dam breaks. Tanya stood clutching the envelope with both hands, her fingers pressing into the paper as if it might dissolve under the weight of what it meant. Her heart pounded with something close to panic. Not because she didn't need this. God, she needed it more than anything. But because receiving it meant admitting just how long she had been drowning, and how long the world had let her. She shook her head slowly, the muscles in her jaw tightening. "I can't," she said, voice brittle. "I can't take this. I can't owe anyone this." Her eyes filled with a fire born not of ingratitude but of survival. "You don't understand. When people give you things, they expect something. They want you to smile and be grateful and disappear before you make them uncomfortable. And when you stop smiling, when you start asking for more, they vanish." She tried to hand the envelope back, pushing it out like it was toxic. Her breath hitched. "I've lived through that kind of help before, the kind that comes with strings wrapped in smiles. And I can't go through that again. I won't." Jasmine didn't move. She let the storm of Tanya's fear rise and crest, then stepped in. Not to soothe it, but to confront it. Her voice didn't raise, but it carved through the tension like steel through cloth. "You think I'm giving this to make you small? To remind you of what you never had?" She took a breath, then leaned forward just slightly. "I've spent the last decade signing bills that were supposed to fix lives. On paper, they look powerful. But paper doesn't work night shifts. It doesn't raise daughters alone. It doesn't scrape together meals with coupons and broken stoves." Her eyes locked on Tanya's, fierce, unwavering. "You think I'm here to pity you? I'm not. I'm here because you're exactly what every policy tries to reach but never touches. I'm not offering a handout. I'm placing a bet on you." Tanya blinked hard, as if the words were too large to hold. Her lip quivered, but she didn't speak. She just stared, frozen between disbelief and the unbearable possibility that someone finally meant what they said. Jasmine reached out and gently placed her hand over Tanya's. "Do you know what pity looks like? It looks like silence, like people walking past while you're breaking your back and pretending not to see you. This," she motioned to the envelope, to the grocery bag still resting at Tanya's feet, to the unopened art kit glowing in the light. "This is something else entirely. This is me seeing you, all of you, and saying, you are not invisible, you are not broken, you are not done." Still, Tanya hesitated. It was as if the trauma had built armor around every nerve, and to let this moment in would be to admit that she had been alone for far too long. And then, just as her defenses began to crack, Lila stepped forward. She had been holding the art kit to her chest like treasure, her little fingers wrapped tight around the handle. But now she let it fall gently to the ground and reached for her mother's hand. Her voice, though small, sliced through the stillness with a kind of purity no adult could ever replicate. "Mama," she said, looking up with those wide, fearless eyes, "you can do it now. You can learn to cook again, like Grandma showed you. Remember? The soup with the herbs and the lasagna with the crunchy cheese?" Her hand squeezed tighter. "You don't have to just tell me the stories anymore. You can make them. You can make your own place. A real one." Tanya choked on a breath she didn't know she was holding. The flood came not in tears, but in the sudden, suffocating realization that her daughter had believed in a future she herself had long stopped daring to imagine. And somehow, without understanding the rules, Lila had known how to keep the dream alive. Quietly, stubbornly, through drawings and whispers and bedtime questions that were never really about bedtime at all. Tanya sank to her knees, and this time she didn't look away. And from the moment Tanya chose not just to accept help, but to act on it, the world around her didn't magically transform. It didn't soften. It didn't open its arms. But she changed. And in doing so, she began to claw space for something bigger than struggle, purpose. And it burned inside her like a pilot light that refused to go out, no matter how cold the nights got. Each morning began in the dark. The city was still quiet, but Tanya was already on her second bus by the time the sky turned gray. Her fingers clutched the frayed strap of her tote, inside of which sat a borrowed paring knife, a packet of notes scribbled in the margins of expired bills, and a cheap apron she hand-washed in the sink each night. She sat by the window, staring out as Washington blurred past, not dreaming, but memorizing. Flavors, textures, movements. Her body ached from the previous night's shift, her eyes red from just 4 hours of sleep. But she didn't complain. She moved like a woman who had decided pain wasn't the enemy. Apathy was. In class, she didn't speak often, but when she did, even the instructors stopped what they were doing. There was weight behind her voice, not loud but unshakable, like someone who didn't have time for theory because her life depended on execution. And then, when the classes ended, the second act of her day began. Back to the gas station. Same uniform, same broken pump, same cracked floor tile by the register that no one ever fixed. But Tanya moved differently now. Not lighter, never lighter, but straighter. She didn't hide her exhaustion anymore. She wore it like armor. And when customers asked what smelled good on her, she didn't say detergent or perfume. She said garlic confit. When they asked what she was always scribbling in that little notebook by the till, she didn't say receipts. She said, recipes. Mine. But the real magic happened at night. Not in the classroom, not at the gas station, but in the tiny apartment where the ceilings leaked and the heat barely worked. That space, that forgotten box in a forgotten neighborhood, became a living lab. The stove clicked erratically and one of the burners flared too hot, but Tanya worked with what she had. She practiced until her hands went numb. She grilled cheap cuts of meat with a precision that made them taste expensive. She folded dumplings by hand, repeating the pattern her mother once taught her by heart. Thumb, pinch, twist. Every failed dish was not a mistake, it was a step. Every burned pan, a lesson. Every bland soup, a reset. She didn't curse the process anymore. She respected it, and always, always Lila was there. Sometimes yawning, sometimes too tired to sit up straight, but never absent. She perched on a cushion near the counter, legs crisscrossed, colored pencils in one hand, sketchbook in the other. But she wasn't drawing princesses or superheroes. No, she was drawing the food, not the way adults would, with accuracy and shading, but the way a child sees truth. Tanya's roasted carrots became gold sticks with brown fire. Her sautéed greens became witch's lace. Her lentil stew, thick and spicy, was simply labeled Mama's strongest soup. Every dish got a picture. Every picture got a name. and every name went up, taped gently with Scotch tape along the kitchen wall until the yellowing paint could barely be seen beneath a patchwork of dreams. They didn't have a dining room table, just a folding tray and two chairs, one of which wobbled. But Lila would read from her wall like it was a printed menu in a five-star restaurant. "Tonight we are serving flame chicken with lucky rice," she'd say, chin lifted high, voice proud, as her mother placed two mismatched bowls on the tray. Tanya would smile, tight, tired, but real, because in that moment, they were building something neither poverty nor policy could touch. This wasn't just practice. This was blueprint. This was revolution disguised as routine. Because inside that apartment, where the walls still wept with water and the fridge groaned like an old man, a mother and her daughter were building a restaurant. One dish, one drawing, one unkillable belief at a time. And while Tanya labored in silence, sweating over a flickering stove, slicing onions on a borrowed cutting board, plating meals on chipped plates under the dim flicker of a dying kitchen bulb, Jasmine returned, not with speeches, not with reporters, not with the spotlight she was so often forced to occupy. She returned the only way true help ever arrives: unannounced, uncelebrated, and unshakably present. She came at strange hours, always alone, always quiet, no SUV, no staffers. She would knock just once on the door of Tanya's apartment, a rhythm that Lila quickly memorized. Tanya would wipe her hands on a dish towel, open the door, and nod. No need for greetings. They were past that. Jasmine would step in, sit on the edge of the threadbare couch, and open a slim black moleskin notebook. She never interrupted. She just observed. The way Tanya held her knives, the way she balanced cumin with lemon, the way she instinctively tasted, not just for flavor, but for memory, for depth. The way she adjusted timing on instinct because the oven ran 40 degrees too hot. Jasmine took it all in. Each detail a revelation, a warning shot to every system that once marked this woman as expendable. But she didn't just watch. Sometimes she'd arrive with packages, quiet offerings from another world, a box of second-hand but razor-sharp Japanese knives from a retiring chef, a voice memo from a culinary director in Baltimore who had reviewed Tanya's beet carpaccio and left a single line: "This woman has a palate born, not taught." A spreadsheet she'd annotated by hand. Profit margins on menu items under $12, color-coded for labor intensity and ingredient shelf life. Jasmine's notes weren't gentle. They weren't meant to soothe. They were meant to sharpen. "The spice blend on the lentils is 92% there. Don't settle. Find a better source for parsley. Yours is dying before the third day. It's killing your freshness. Your plating looks like survival. Make it look like confidence." There were nights when Tanya would snap, exhausted and trembling from a 16-hour grind. "I'm not some charity case for your project," she'd growl, her fists clenched, pride flaring under fatigue. Jasmine never flinched. "Good," she'd reply, calm and hard, "because I'm not here to rescue you. I'm here to prepare you for war." Then she'd close her notebook and leave. And still she came back. She sent Tanya PDFs of kitchen layouts drawn by a Cuban immigrant who now ran 3 restaurants in Atlanta. She left behind a used thermometer calibrated to the decimal, knowing that in Tanya's world, the line between perfect and ruined was razor thin. She taught Tanya how to convert grams to ounces in her head, how to price meals not just by ingredient, but by time, how to stop cooking like someone hoping for permission, and start cooking like someone preparing for her opening night. Every whisper of Jasmine's guidance was a rebellion against the system that failed Tanya at every step. And every night Tanya accepted it. Gritted teeth and all, she moved one step closer to becoming the kind of woman no law, no policy, and no forgotten file could ever ignore again. This wasn't mentorship, this was insurgency. And Jasmine wasn't her savior, she was her accomplice. And so the nights stretched into weeks, the meals multiplied, and the wall of crayon-colored menus in Tanya's apartment grew like a living testament to belief reborn. But even as Tanya labored in silence and grit, she had no idea that Jasmine had been fighting another battle behind the scenes. Quietly, methodically, ruthlessly. constructing the one thing Tanya never dared imagine she'd ever stand inside again, her own restaurant. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. The air was warm for DC, the kind of late-season calm that made the streets feel suspended in time. Tanya thought she was meeting Jasmine for a quick walkthrough of a commercial kitchen someone had listed online, another potential dead end, she assumed. But when she turned the corner onto a small block nestled between a laundromat and a shuttered bookstore, she stopped cold. There were people gathered, maybe a dozen. A few held cameras. One had a notepad, but Tanya didn't see any of them. Her eyes locked on the building, or rather the sign. Lila's Table, homemade with heart. The lettering wasn't flashy. It was warm, hand-painted, curved slightly as if bowing to the neighborhood itself. It hung above a wide glass storefront, the windows recently polished, framing a space that pulsed with potential. Tanya stood frozen on the sidewalk. Her breath caught somewhere between her ribs and her throat. "What? What is this?" she whispered. Jasmine was already standing near the entrance. Dressed simply, clipboard in hand, she nodded to the journalist beside her to wait. Then she crossed the sidewalk slowly and looked Tanya straight in the eyes. "It's yours," she said. "Every inch." Tanya's body recoiled slightly, not from fear, but disbelief. "No," she muttered. This can't be real. I don't have credit. I don't have capital. I don't have permits. I don't even have a business account." She shook her head violently, like trying to shake off a hallucination. "I'm still working night shifts. I was going to send another catering application tomorrow." Jasmine placed a hand on Tanya's arm. Firm, grounding. "I know," she said. "That's why I did it quietly. Leased it under a trust, used my connections to expedite the permits. Contacted small business investors willing to cover startup costs in exchange for a share of your catering brand down the line. All clean, all legal. You don't owe anyone a dime today. This isn't a gift. It's your launch pad." Tanya's knees nearly buckled. She staggered back a step, one hand going to her chest, the other gripping the metal railing outside the storefront like a lifeline. Her whole body was trembling now. "But why?" she said, tears flooding her voice. "Why would you do all of this for me? There are so many other women, so many people who need help. I'm just a—" "Stop," Jasmine said, voice suddenly steel. "You are not just anything. You are the reason I got into public service before politics turned it into theater. You are what every bill I ever fought for should have become. And you are the one who didn't ask for a damn thing but earned every inch of this with fire in your bones." Tanya's hand rose to her mouth. Her eyes scanned the windows again, the newly installed countertops visible through the glass, the faint aroma of fresh wood and paint still drifting from inside. The space wasn't large, but it was perfect. Warm-toned walls, clean floor plan, kitchen tucked just far enough behind the counter to hint at mystery. It didn't feel like a donation. It felt like a declaration. She belonged here. Before she could speak again, the front door flung open with a tiny creak, and Lila came bursting out, her backpack bouncing, her sneakers skidding across the sidewalk. She had been waiting inside, sketchbook in hand, perched by the register counter. She saw the sign above and squealed before her feet even hit the ground. "Mama!" she shouted, running full force into Tanya's legs. "Mama, you're a chef now. A real chef. It says so on the sign." Tanya dropped to her knees, scooping Lila into her arms as if anchoring herself to something more real than the world around her. "Is this really happening?" she whispered into her daughter's hair. Lila nodded, clutching her tightly. "I saw the stove. It's huge. And there's a spot by the window where I can draw menus while you cook. I already made a new one." Journalists watched from a respectful distance. Neighbors peeked out from the laundromat windows, and Jasmine stood quietly behind them all, arms folded, not smiling but burning with purpose. Because this wasn't charity, it was justice. Delayed maybe, but not denied. Tanya stood slowly, Lila's hand still in hers. Her eyes returned to the sign one more time. The name wasn't hers, it was her daughter's. But the work behind it, the struggle, the nights, the cuts, the fire, that was all her. She turned to Jasmine. I don't know how to run a restaurant, she admitted, her voice steady now, not in fear, but in truth. Not yet. Jasmine nodded. Then we'll figure it out. You're not alone anymore. And this time, no one gets to steal your momentum. Tanya stepped forward, toward the front door. The keys were already in her hand, slipped there by Jasmine moments earlier. She turned the lock. The door opened. And as she crossed the threshold, daughter beside her, pressed behind her, purpose in her step, Tanya Reed didn't just enter a restaurant. She stepped into the life she'd once buried beneath broken shifts and silent nights. And this time, she wasn't asking permission. She was claiming territory. And as the soft murmur of voices filled the newly lit dining room of Lila's table, and Tanya's lasagna made its way through the warmth and clatter of dishes, Jasmine sat alone in the farthest corner, watching as history unfolded. Not the kind carved in stone or shouted on cable news, but the kind forged in grease, sleepless nights, and the unrecorded courage of a woman who had refused to stay broken. There was no podium, no ribbon cutting, no spotlight, and yet there was power in the air, real, unfiltered power. It clung to the scent of slow-roasted tomato sauce, danced in the flicker of tea lights on every table, lived in the laughter of guests who didn't know they were stepping into the first chapter of something irreversible. The walls were still bare in places, and the chairs didn't match perfectly. But that didn't matter. The room pulsed with something far richer than perfection. It pulsed with earned presence. This was no longer a dream taped to a wall. It was real. It had a health code license, a stove that worked, and a woman at its helm who had bled to reach this exact second. From her corner seat, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't wave. She didn't interfere. She just watched. Watched Tanya work the room like she was born to command it. Watched her move between kitchen and tables with that rare balance of focus and warmth, grace and grit. Watched her greet guests not like a host, but like a guardian of something sacred. Jasmine saw it in the hands, the posture, the breath between steps. This wasn't nervousness. It was recognition. Tanya knew she had arrived, and that knowledge ran deeper than confidence. It was defiance fulfilled. When Tanya emerged from the kitchen with the first lasagna in her hands, something in the room shifted. Conversations dimmed just slightly. Heads turned. This wasn't just food. It was a statement. She walked slowly, not for theatrics, but because every step felt like a resurrection. She didn't hand the plate to a server. She carried it herself. The steam rose in gentle ribbons from the golden crust. Each step toward Jasmine more than movement. It was testimony. When she reached Jasmine's table, she didn't speak at first. She simply placed the plate down, hands still trembling slightly, then sat across from her. Her chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, but her eyes were glassed with the weight of it all. The years, the rejections, the shifts, the hunger, the unpaid bills, the walk home with a sleeping child on her shoulder in the rain. It was all here, wrapped inside the lasagna, inside the moment, inside the knowledge that this table, this room, was hers. She exhaled, looked Jasmine in the eye, and finally said, voice cracking but strong, I used to think I was a case number, a box someone ticked in a poverty report, another name buried under percentages and policy goals no one really believed in. She paused, looked around the restaurant again. But you made me feel like a story, one that was never meant to be erased. Jasmine held her gaze. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were still. When she spoke, her voice wasn't polished. It wasn't political. It was raw, stripped of ceremony. Tanya, you were never statistics to me, she said. You were the silence between the votes, the woman we were all supposed to see, but didn't. And the shame of that isn't yours. It's ours. She leaned forward now, elbows on the table, her tone lowering like a battle cry softened by conviction. But now the silence is broken. You broke it. Not by begging, not by waiting, but by doing. By showing us what it means to build something out of nothing. To cook a legacy from scraps. To stitch together a dream that every system told you was unrealistic. Tanya swallowed hard. Her throat moved like she was holding back everything that could no longer be said with words. I still feel like I'm going to wake up tomorrow and it'll all be gone. she confessed quietly. Like I'm still one overdue bill away from losing this. Like the walls might vanish if I close my eyes. Jasmine's response was immediate, quiet but firm. Then don't close them. Keep them open. Keep walking. And know this place isn't just a kitchen. It's a flame. And now you're holding the torch. She reached out and gently tapped the corner of the table. You lit it with your pain. You stoked it with your sweat. And now it's your job to pass that fire to someone else. Someone who still thinks they're invisible. Tanya sat back. Her shoulders dropped, but not from defeat, from release. The kind that comes after years of clenching your soul just to survive. She looked toward the counter, where Lila now stood in her own small apron, handing out menus, offering crayons to kids, proudly pointing to her signature at the bottom of every page. And suddenly Tanya saw it clearly. This wasn't the end of a journey. It was the first moment she truly had something to pass down. She turned to Jasmine, eyes steady now. Then I will, she said. I swear I will. I'll make sure no woman like me ever thinks she's just surviving. Not if I can help it. Jasmine finally took a breath, then smiled, not wide, not public, but deeply. Then this, she said, tapping the table again, is just the beginning. And as the final crumbs of lasagna were cleared and the warm hum of Lila's table settled into its nightly rhythm, something deeper hung in the air, something unspoken, yet undeniable. This wasn't just the birth of a restaurant. It was the rebirth of a woman, of a voice, of a truth too long choked by survival. And in that quiet, Jasmine saw it clearly. The story didn't end with applause. It began with a question. What do we do now that we know what's possible? The lesson didn't come wrapped in speeches or carved into plaques. It came in fragments, slow, brutal, redemptive. It came in Tanya's calloused hands and sleepless eyes, in Lila's torn sketchbook, now framed behind the counter as the restaurant's first menu, in the silence of every politician who had once voted to cut the very funds that might have kept Tanya in culinary school. In the cold truth that success had not arrived through the system, it had clawed its way around it, and that is the tragedy and the miracle all at once. Because what Tanya achieved was extraordinary, but it should never have been so rare. The real injustice wasn't just that she struggled, it was that her story was never meant to be heard. This is the war no one televises, the war of quiet dreams against loud indifference. The war of single mothers who tuck in their children while skipping their own meals. Of aspiring chefs who practice recipes on borrowed stoves, in apartments where the gas cuts off at midnight. It's not fought with guns. It's fought with grit, with grace, with unyielding faith that something better can be cooked out of ruin. And yet, when these women rise, we call them miracles. But the truth? They were never the exception. They were always the standard, just starved of fuel. Jasmine knew this all too well. For every Tanya who made it, there were hundreds more still stuck in the shadows. Voices buried under bureaucracy. Brilliance choked by red tape and paperwork stamped denied. And the moral of Tanya's journey was not that one woman made it. It was that she should never have had to make it alone. The lesson was this: kindness is not enough. Sympathy is not a solution. Tanya didn't need pity. She needed access. She needed someone to not just listen, but act. Not to save her, but to open the damn door and get out of her way. The real power Jasmine wielded wasn't money or status. It was the willingness to see someone the system had chosen not to see. And that small act, radical in its clarity, had done more than any bill she had ever signed. But the most human part of all? Tanya never asked for any of it. She didn't knock on doors. She didn't campaign for help. She worked. She endured. She raised a daughter in a world that tried to make her invisible, and still found the strength to draw joy on napkins, to teach Lila to dream even while she'd forgotten how to. And when Jasmine finally extended her hand, Tanya didn't fall into it. She met it, standing. That's what makes this story dangerous. Not because it's dramatic, but because it tells the truth about how far a human spirit can go when it's finally given room to breathe. It reminds us that the battlefield of injustice isn't just in headlines or courtrooms. Sometimes it's at gas stations, in kitchens, on forgotten street corners where a neon sign flickers above a second chance. And the cost of not fighting back? It's paid in the talents we never meet, the flavors we never taste, the leaders we never hear, the Lila's tables that never open. The story forces us to ask, how many Tanyas are we walking past every day? How many dreams have we mistaken for statistics? How many solutions have we buried beneath paperwork and cynicism? And most painfully, what greatness have we let die quietly simply because it didn't look like power when we first saw it? But it also leaves us with hope. Not the soft, lazy kind that sits back and waits, but the kind that demands participation. The kind that says, you saw this. You can't unsee it. Now what will you do? It calls on every one of us not to be heroes, but accomplices. Not to rescue, but to reinforce. Not to lead, but to lift. Because Tanya's story is not just hers anymore. It belongs to anyone who's ever been counted out and anyone who dares to count them back in. It belongs to every single reader who finishes this tale with a full heart and asks, who is the Tanya in my world? And what can I do to make her unstoppable? And maybe that's the most powerful truth of all. The smallest acts, when rooted in belief and carried out with action, can crack open the sky. And from that crack, a fire can be passed, one dream at a time, one table at a time, until no one is left outside the room they were born to cook in. And now, if you've made it this far, if your heart tightened as Tanya stood trembling with that lasagna plate, if you saw Lila's crayon menus taped to brick walls and felt something burn behind your ribs, then this story doesn't end with you. This isn't just a tale to consume. It's a mirror, a provocation, a call to the deepest part of your conscience, because you don't walk away from a fire like this. You either help it spread or you help put it out. Look again at Tanya. Look beyond the glow of success. See the graveyard of silent losses she buried on the way here. Tuition that never cleared, government grants denied without reason, nights she wrapped Lila in a winter coat because the heat was cut again. See the million small indignities she survived that no camera ever caught. Then ask yourself, who paid for her victory? She did. With every drop of energy, this country refused to invest in her. But it doesn't have to be that way. Not for the next Tanya. And that's where you come in. No, this isn't about donations or hashtags. This is deeper, more disruptive. This is about unlearning the comfort of watching from the sidelines. This is about breaking the habit of saying, I hope someone helps, and realizing you are someone. Whether you're a teacher, a business owner, a neighbor, a policymaker, or just a person with 1 hour to give, you are the system. You are the vote. You are the connection that someone like Tanya needs not to be seen as charity, but as potential. Find the Tanyas. They are everywhere. At bus stops before dawn, in community colleges, working night shifts, in domestic violence shelters tracing recipes from memory, at every underfunded school where mothers show up with nothing but determination and a child clinging to hope. Stop thinking of them as cases. Start seeing them as builders, leaders, catalysts of change who are already fighting, just without the armor the rest of us take for granted. You want to help? Then get in the kitchen, mentor one, fund one, hire someone who doesn't check every neat box on the resume. Speak up when you see policies gutting programs that help women like Tanya survive. Stop letting silence be your signature on someone else's erasure. And if you work in power, real power, the kind that signs laws, allocates funds, writes rules for who gets access and who gets left behind, then you have no excuse. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't wait for a budget cycle. She didn't hide behind the process. She saw one woman worth fighting for, and she acted. Not later, not eventually. Now she didn't just write legislation. She rewrote someone's future. That kind of leadership isn't out of reach. It's a choice. A hard one, yes, but the only one worth making. So here it is. The challenge, the charge, the plea. Don't let Tanya's story be rare. Make it common. Make it boring because it happens so often. Make it expected that a woman like her rises not through luck, but through design. Be the person who opens the door and doesn't just hold it, but walks someone through it. Be the one who believes before proof arrives. Be the one who listens when someone says, I have a dream, but no path. And say back, let's build one together. Because if you don't, who will? And if not now, when? The fire is already burning. The kitchen is already open. The only question left is, will you show up? Or will you let the next Tanya cook alone again in the dark? And when that fire spreads, don't look away. Stand closer. Let it scorch your indifference. Let it demand more of you. Because change isn't a viral post or a fleeting moment of inspiration. Change is consistency. It's showing up when the cameras are gone. It's believing when the dream is still fragile. It's being the stranger who says, I see you. I believe in what you're building. That's where the real power lives. Not in grand speeches, but in the quiet refusal to let another Tanya go unseen. So ask yourself right now, who is your Tanya? What kitchen, classroom, corner, or crossroad are you ignoring because it doesn't shout? Find that place, find that person, and do something that matters, because no law, no institution, no revolution was ever born without someone deciding, enough, enough waiting, enough pretending, enough passing the burden to someone else. The future is already knocking. The only question is, will you answer? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. Inside a sealed courtroom in San Francisco, live streamed to 70 million stunned viewers, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett is stripped of her citizenship by Judge Edward Chen, without trial, without defense, without mercy. But 5 minutes later, she flips the tables with a single act of defiance, exposing not just corruption, but the outlines of treason buried deep within the federal bench. This isn't politics. It's betrayal at a national scale. What happens when the man holding the gavel is the one who betrayed the flag? And when treason wears a black robe, what punishment could ever be enough? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. At precisely 3:12 a.m., Jasmine Crockett's phone vibrated on the nightstand with a high-priority alert. The subject line glowed like a warning shot. Mandatory appearance, Federal Ethics Tribunal, 9 a.m. No explanation, no contact, just a location in downtown San Francisco and a seal marked classified. Within seconds, she was sitting upright, adrenaline pounding harder than any alarm. Her legal team hadn't been notified. Her congressional office was dark, and the tribunal, a body she'd never even heard of, created, it seemed, just for this moment. When she arrived hours later at the courthouse, escorted not by aides but by silent marshals, the marble halls felt colder than stone, like something ancient and weaponized. Cameras lined the ceiling corners, blinking red, feeding live to over 70 million viewers worldwide. But inside the chamber, not a single civilian sat. As she stepped through the heavy double doors, Jasmine saw the nameplate before the bench, and her pulse froze. Presiding, Judge Edward Chen, a federal judge with no jurisdiction over ethics violations of elected officials. And yet here he was, robed in authority he wasn't supposed to have. The room was designed like a theater. No jury box, no gallery, only a raised dais and a single seat in the middle. Hers. The walls were padded, not for sound, but for control. Her chair didn't even swivel. It locked her in place like a defendant at a war tribunal. Before she could speak, the clerk announced, "All legal representation is restricted. The respondent will address the bench directly, without counsel." Her attorney was escorted out without a word. No motions were allowed, no access to discovery, no documentation had been provided. The judge's first words dropped like a hammer. This court does not entertain argument. It executes review. Jasmine, still composed on the outside, felt the air constrict around her, not from fear, but from clarity. She had just walked into an ambush in plain sight, and the world was watching. The silence that followed Judge Edward Chen's decree, no counsel, no argument, was suffocating. Not empty, not passive. It pulsed like a pressure chamber, invisible yet visceral. The oxygen in the room seemed to compress, thickening with an unseen weight that pressed against Jasmine's ribs, her throat, her resolve. The cameras above blinked silently, predatory, transmitting every second to tens of millions who had no idea they weren't watching justice unfold. They were watching it collapse. She had faced hostile hearings before, congressional ambushes, talk show smear campaigns. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't theater. It was premeditated annihilation wrapped in legal protocol. Judge Chen didn't clear his throat. He didn't shuffle papers. He simply began, as though reading from scripture, cold, rehearsed, final. The respondent, he intoned, not using her name, is hereby found in material breach of the public confidence doctrine, in sustained violation of ethical clause 3.1, and in probable collusion with external destabilizing networks. His voice was detached, almost tranquil, a bureaucrat delivering a death sentence with the effect of a weather report. There was no charge sheet, no burden of proof, no inquiry into her intent, context, or character. It was a monologue masquerading as justice, and every word was a scalpel meant to cut her out of the American body politic. Jasmine's hands were still. Her breathing was measured, but not calm. Inside her chest, a quiet war raged between discipline and devastation. Not because she believed the words, but because the system did. She glanced at her counsel, seated helplessly 2 rows behind a security partition, his mouth moving in silent protest no one could hear. He had been stripped of voice, title, and even pen. Not even a legal pad had been allowed to pass the perimeter. Jasmine Crockett, a sitting member of Congress, now sat in federal court without a single constitutional right intact. Chen leaned slightly forward. "This court will not entertain grandstanding," he said, though no one had spoken. "The facts are determined. The record is closed." The phrase struck like a hammer blow. No record had been opened. No facts had been debated. There had been no opportunity to respond, to submit evidence, to even acknowledge the allegations being levied against her. And yet here it was, a verdict dressed in the costume of procedure, made all the more chilling by its speed. The next moment felt like time fraying at the edges. "It is the ruling of this tribunal," Chen declared, his voice tightening ever so slightly, "that Jasmine Crockett is to be stripped of her United States citizenship, effective immediately." No gavel strike, no dramatic pause, just a single sentence spoken with the steadiness of a knife sliding into flesh. A few people in the room inhaled sharply. The stenographer's fingers trembled. Somewhere in the live stream booth, a technician dropped a headset, but Chen kept speaking. "Further," he continued, "the respondent shall be removed from all official posts. All federal access credentials shall be invalidated within 24 hours. All properties, accounts, or assets derived from government associations shall be placed under immediate audit and freeze order." His eyes remained locked forward, not on Jasmine, but through her, as if she were already absent, already erased. Then came the final blow. "The respondent shall be prohibited from entering Washington, D.C., or engaging with any federal office or agency, digital or physical, until such time as the state determines eligibility has been restored under the exceptional review protocol." There was no exceptional review protocol. The phrase was invented, a bureaucratic black hole into which rights disappeared. And still, Jasmine had not spoken a word. She tried, once. Her jaw tightened, her mouth opened, but before the first syllable could form, Chen raised his palm. "This court does not recognize unsolicited verbal commentary," he said, not with anger, but with dismissal. It wasn't even repression, it was erasure. He had removed her voice before it could be heard, just as he had removed her citizenship before it could be defended. The very act of speaking had become a punishable offense. The injustice was so layered, so meticulously constructed, that even the press gallery didn't know how to react. These were veteran journalists, hardened, sharp-eyed, experienced in scandal and spin, but not this. Not the mechanized invalidation of a public servant in real time. The courtroom had no jury because it didn't need one. This wasn't a trial. It was an execution by silence. Jasmine's mind tried to keep pace with what her body could not process. In less than 10 minutes, she had been transformed from an elected representative of over 700,000 Americans to a digital ghost. Her congressional ID card would already be deactivated. Her government email locked. Her phone pinging with automated alerts. Your access has been revoked. Your session has expired. Your authority is no longer valid. Systems built to protect had turned with the precision of a blade. But it was the language, more than the logistics, that did the deepest damage. Stripped, erased, prohibited, frozen. These were not judicial terms. These were control mechanisms, meant not only to punish, but to make an example. The message wasn't just for her. It was for anyone watching, anyone who ever imagined they could stand tall in the face of power and still survive. Jasmine felt the gaze of the cameras now, millions of them, all staring through lenses like barrels. Her mother would be watching, her colleagues, her former law school professors, children who had once pointed at her poster in classrooms, believing she was what justice looked like. And now? Now she had been rebranded as a cautionary tale. Live. But she still didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. Because even as the system dragged her name through a bloodless coup, she understood something more terrifying than the punishment itself. This had always been waiting. Not a sudden strike, but a long-laid trap. She hadn't been ambushed. She had been tracked. And yet, as Judge Chen turned the page to finalize the order, as the sentence crystallized into digital permanence, something inside Jasmine Crockett didn't break. It sharpened. Because there's one thing that power forgets when it moves too fast to feel the blade in its hand. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes silence is a spark, and she wasn't done burning. And as the last words of her sentence echoed through the courtroom, Jasmine didn't flinch. But something inside her shifted, not from fear or shock. Those had already passed. What surfaced now was a memory, sharp, uninvited, a wind through a broken window, one she hadn't spoken of in years. But it had shaped everything. It was summer 2002. Jasmine had just turned 17. Her best friend Danielle, 18, was walking home from her shift at a mobile station in Fort Worth. They spoke around midnight. Danielle said she was tired. Jasmine told her to call once she got home. That call never came. By morning, she was worried. By noon, she was frantic. No one had seen Danielle. Her phone was off. The gas station confirmed she left work as usual. Jasmine and Danielle's mom called every hospital, every police station. Nothing. The next day, ICE called back. Danielle had been picked up near a 7-Eleven. They said she matched a suspect in an immigration case. A woman from Colombia with the same name. No ID, no fingerprint match, no photo, just a name. Danielle, born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was now being held as a possible undocumented immigrant. Jasmine remembered standing in her room, frozen. She thought, this has to be a mistake. It'll be fixed when they see her birth certificate, when they hear us out. But that's not what happened. Jasmine rushed to the ICE center with Danielle's documents in hand. Birth certificate, school ID, yearbook photo. She was stopped at the gate. A guard behind bulletproof glass said, "You're not listed as immediate family. You're not her attorney. You can't speak to her." Jasmine tried to slide the papers through the slot. The guard didn't even glance, just shut the window and turned away. She stood there knocking, crying, nothing. Danielle was inside, isolated. No phone call, no explanation. For the first 24 hours, she didn't know why she'd been detained. She was questioned repeatedly, fingerprinted, called by the wrong name. When Jasmine finally saw her, Danielle said, voice shaking, "I thought they were going to send me somewhere I've never even seen. I thought I was gone." She was fed cold food, slept with the lights on. No one believed her. No one listened. Jasmine spent 3 days running from newsroom to law office to state reps' offices, begging someone to act. One reporter finally agreed to cover the story. One staffer made a call. That was enough. Danielle was released on the 3rd day. No apology, no explanation, just a sealed envelope with her belongings and a warning to always carry her paperwork. When Jasmine picked her up, Danielle didn't speak. She just sat in the car, shaking, staring at her hands, then whispered, "I don't feel real anymore." That sentence never left Jasmine. It stayed through college, law school, her first public defender job, her campaigns, and now it was back, here in a courtroom where a federal judge had tried to erase her without hearing a word. Because that was when Jasmine learned what no civics class ever taught. Citizenship in America isn't always a guarantee. Not if someone powerful decides to question it. Danielle had been born here, paid taxes, lived her life by the rules, and still a clerical error nearly stripped her of everything. That was the moment Jasmine made herself a promise, quiet, unshakable. Citizenship isn't a gift from the powerful. It's a birthright, and no one takes it without a fight. It became her compass, her cause, why she became a lawyer, why she took impossible cases, why she stood, even when the room was stacked against her, because she knew what it felt like to be told you didn't belong. And now here she was, a sitting congresswoman, being told she no longer counted, that her rights could be deleted by decree. But she wasn't 17 anymore. She wasn't at a window, begging to be heard. Now the cameras were on, the world was watching, and Jasmine Crockett wasn't going to let anyone, not even a federal judge, pretend she didn't exist. Not again. Not ever. She hadn't said a single word during the entire sentencing. Not one objection, not one plea, not even a breath wasted on outrage. She had sat still as her name, her status, and her citizenship were dismantled by a man in a black robe with absolute control and no accountability. But now, as Judge Edward Chen reached for the closing file, prepared to slam the door on her rights and write her into history as a cautionary tale, Jasmine Crockett finally stood. The room didn't expect it. The cameras didn't predict it. But something in the stillness cracked open as she rose, slow and unwavering. The metal legs of her chair scraped against the polished courtroom floor, with a sound so sharp it cut the air like a blade. Chen didn't even look at her at first. He was shuffling his papers, signaling to the clerk, ready to end the spectacle he thought he'd choreographed to perfection. He believed it was over. That's when her voice entered the room. Calm, clear, controlled. "I'm not here to defend myself. I just need 120 seconds. Not for mercy, but for verification." The room froze. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it, with the authority of someone who had lost everything but still held one last truth in her hands. No stammer, no apology, just a precise statement carved out of steel. The bailiff shifted uneasily. The clerk paused mid-gesture. Even the low hum of equipment seemed to fade. For the first time that morning, Jasmine Crockett had seized the rhythm of the room, and the room knew it. Judge Chen glanced up, eyebrows raised not in surprise but in irritation. To him, this was noise, static, a bump in the script. He leaned back, let out a small sigh, and gave a tight, performative shrug. 2 minutes, he said, dismissive as a man granting a child permission to speak before being grounded. Then we move on. He thought he was being magnanimous. He didn't know he'd just opened the door to the beginning of his own undoing. The cameras, all 16 of them wired into every corner of the chamber, turned in unison toward Jasmine. Not because someone ordered them to, because the room itself had shifted. There was no legal precedent for what she was doing, but there was a hunger in the public watching from home, a hunger for something real, something unscripted, something that felt like it mattered. They didn't yet know what she was about to say, but they knew this wasn't part of the plan. And in politics, when something breaks the script, that's when truth has a chance to break through. Jasmine didn't move quickly. She didn't raise her voice. She simply reached forward, with the steadiness of someone who had prepared for this exact second. From beneath the single document folder allowed on her desk, she pulled out a plain, unmarked envelope. Her hands didn't shake. Her posture didn't bend. She didn't look around the room for support. She looked directly at Edward Chen, their eyes locked. For the first time since the proceedings began, she wasn't the one on trial. He was. And in that moment, With a nation holding its breath, with power seated just 30 feet across from her, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just reclaiming her voice. She was aiming it. As Judge Chen reclined, believing the next 2 minutes would pass like static on a forgotten channel, Jasmine turned to the nation. Not to explain, not to beg, but to begin the autopsy of his authority. The courtroom lights seemed brighter now. The red live indicators on the cameras blazed like sirens. She stepped forward, not toward the judge, but toward the lens, toward the 70 million watching from living rooms, classrooms, subway cars, anyone who had been told to believe in the purity of power. She unfolded the first page from the folder in her hand. Not hurried, not showy. Every movement was precise, as if she'd rehearsed it in her mind 100 times, waiting for the moment power overplayed its hand. She held it with both hands, not for drama, for clarity. "This," she said calmly, "is an email sent directly from Judge Edward Chen to a law firm based in Shanghai, Zhongren Legal Group, dated just over a month ago." The courtroom stilled. The message reads, "Please confirm that the payment structure remains untraceable through U.S. financial reporting. I trust your firm will coordinate the timing accordingly. Full confidentiality is expected until the ruling is made public." She paused, locking eyes with Chen. "That's your name at the bottom, Judge. E. Chen. Directly from your court-linked email." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The weight of them landed like a hammer. Not on the bench, but on the public trust. She calmly placed that sheet down and picked up the next. "This is a bank transfer record," she said, "issued by HSBC Hong Kong. It shows a direct wire transfer of 1.2 million US dollars to an account under Judge Chen's name." Her voice remained steady. "The transaction occurred at 10:04 a.m. Hong Kong time, the day before Judge Chen's controversial ruling in the TikTok data privacy case." She let the timeline land fully. One day before he blocked U.S. agencies from placing new restrictions on a foreign-owned app under national investigation. One day before he used the full weight of federal power to side with overseas interest, without transparency, without oversight. You could feel it now, the entire courtroom breathing differently. Not just tension, but realization. For the first time, there was something heavier in the air than accusation. Proof. She moved to the final piece. "Some people might think the timing is a coincidence. So let's go one level deeper." Jasmine pulled out a Post-it note, small, worn, but explosive in its simplicity. "This," she said, holding it gently, "was written by Judge Chen's own assistant. Verified handwriting. Date stamped. It reads, and I quote, 'Cancel Friday schedule. Don't risk overlapping with the ruling. Might raise questions if I'm seen.'" There was no theatrical pause, no shouting. She didn't need to scream to shatter the room. She just placed the note down in front of her and looked up. Calm, firm, ready. "This wasn't bad judgment. It was a cover-up," she said, "and this court was used to carry it out." Judge Chen sat frozen. Not out of surprise, but because there was nothing left to say. In that moment, the man who had tried to silence her with legal technicalities now found himself surrounded by facts so clear, so carefully laid out, they needed no interpretation. And Jasmine Crockett, once the target, was now the only person in the room with control. But Jasmine wasn't finished, because what came next wasn't just corruption. It was something far more dangerous, a betrayal tied not to greed, but to a foreign flag. She gave another subtle nod toward the technician. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the main monitor came alive. A wide, high-definition screen facing the gallery and flanked by federal seals. Across millions of screens at home, the live stream flickered, sharpened, and then locked in. Full-screen display of classified financial data. The camera panned in as Jasmine stepped to the side, allowing the evidence to take center stage. One by one, the files began rotating. Crisp images of bank transfers bearing Chen's name, official letterhead emails from Zhongren Legal Group, and metadata reports mapping IP access logs between Beijing, San Francisco, and Hong Kong. Jasmine didn't rush. She pointed to a highlighted portion of a wire confirmation. "This one," she said, "shows a transfer of 1.2 million US dollars from a flagged Chinese trust account into a private fund controlled by Judge Chen, dated one day before his ruling to protect TikTok from federal regulatory action. She paused, allowing the date to burn itself into the public's memory. But the money is only the surface. The next slide appeared, an enlarged email with the sender and recipient clearly visible, from Edward Chen's official court address, sent directly to a senior partner at Zhongren Legal in China. The subject line read simply, "Final coordination regarding the Crockett ruling." Jasmine's voice was firm but low, as if even she understood the gravity of the sentence she was about to read aloud to an entire country. Once the ruling against Crockett is finalized, I expect the investment to be secured in digital asset format, as outlined in our Hong Kong DC transfer agreement. Please ensure blockchain conversion is complete prior to public disclosure. She stopped reading. Her eyes scanned the room. This isn't hearsay. This is a federal judge using his courtroom and my name as leverage for offshore crypto payments from a foreign law firm. The effect was instantaneous. A stunned silence took over the chamber. Reporters instinctively reached for their phones. Some didn't even type. They just stared at the screen, jaws clenched. Across the country, the message was hitting harder than anyone expected. This wasn't about campaign donations or subtle favors. This was a federal judge admitting, in writing, that his ruling was tied to a pre-negotiated payout, secured in cryptocurrency, with an entity connected to a foreign government. Jasmine walked toward the monitor and pointed to the final line of the email. Now zoomed in. Confirm that all records will be deleted from shared servers after transfer is executed. She turned back to the courtroom and said it clearly. That is destruction of evidence. That is financial laundering. That is conspiracy. And that is treason. The word hung in the air like a suspended blade. No one in the chamber moved. Even Judge Chen had stopped fidgeting. He leaned slightly back, but the color in his face had drained. He wasn't writing anymore. He wasn't speaking. He was simply absorbing, in silence, the unraveling of a secret he had thought was buried in firewalled folders and encrypted ledgers. And Jasmine? She stood tall. No rage, no arrogance, just the steady composure of a woman who had spent her career being underestimated and now had the whole nation's undivided attention. Because in a country where justice is supposed to be blind, she had just proven it was for sale and named the buyer. Just when the courtroom thought the storm had passed, Jasmine stepped forward again, not with documents this time, but with a witness whose silence had nearly cost him his life and whose truth was about to tear the entire foundation apart. She turned slightly, her posture firm but respectful, and said into the microphone, "Your Honor, under congressional protection, I call forward a witness the nation has never heard from, but should have years ago." The rear doors creaked open with slow ceremony. Every neck in the chamber twisted as a single figure stepped through. Tall, well-dressed, precise in movement. His face was calm, but there was something behind his eyes, the kind of weight that only comes from having held the truth too long. Gasps fluttered through the courtroom as the cameras focused. On screen, the chyron read, Liv Kenji Ayamura, former senior financial officer, U.S. Federal Court, California District. Until that moment, his name had never appeared in a headline. And yet, from the tension in the air, you would have thought the man walking to the witness stand was a nuclear scientist defecting in real time. He approached the table with quiet gravity, placed a small metal briefcase on the surface, and took the oath with a voice barely above a whisper. Then he adjusted the microphone. My name is Kenji Ayamura. I served as Senior Financial Compliance Officer at the California District of the Federal Court System for 13 years. I had access to all interagency transactions, security clearance on encrypted server routing, and direct oversight over court-managed transfer protocols. And I am here because I refused to destroy evidence I was ordered to delete. A silence dropped so suddenly that even the buzz from fluorescent lights seemed to fade. I was instructed, Ayamura said carefully, to remove all traces of an international wire transfer log that involved a foreign trust account, routed through the Hong Kong branch of HSBC. His voice did not waver. The name attached to the transfer was Judge Edward Chen. He reached down, clicked open the briefcase, and pulled out a matte black USB drive in a sealed tamper-proof bag. I kept this, he said, holding it high enough for every camera to catch it. Not for leverage, not for protection, but because I couldn't sleep knowing I had watched the Constitution bend to foreign cash and said nothing. The courtroom froze in place, stunned not just by the content, but by the clarity, the simplicity of it. There were no legal loopholes to interpret, no complex theories, just a man, standing under oath, stating plainly that he had been told to erase a crime and chose not to. Jasmine stood silently beside him, letting every word carry its full weight. She didn't interrupt. She didn't elaborate. She let him speak, because the truth didn't need narration anymore. I received the directive at 2:17 a.m. via a secure admin relay from within the judiciary's own encrypted comms platform, Amora continued. The file came with a note. Remove all associated metadata from the Crockett case index. Transfer logs from March 27th to March 29th are to be deleted permanently. This is an internal security action. Do not escalate. He pulled out a printed copy of the deletion request. This is it. I kept it. It's been forensically verified. The judge's face remained frozen, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the bench. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop. No one moved. Then came the part that no one expected, the personal cost. I was given 48 hours to comply. When I refused, I was reassigned without cause. 2 weeks later, my home was broken into. Nothing stolen. Only my encrypted work drives were taken. Amora inhaled deeply, then added, my wife begged me to walk away. My friends told me to move overseas, but I stayed. I stayed because this wasn't about one ruling. This was about whether the justice system still belongs to the people or whether it's already been bought. He set the flash drive down like it was a loaded weapon. Every transaction is time-stamped. Every command to erase them is recorded. You'll see the dates match exactly with the evidence Congresswoman Crockett just presented. Jasmine finally stepped forward again. This witness risked everything, his family, his career, his safety, to hold on to the last digital copy of the truth. She said, if not for him, these files would have been wiped from every system in the country. He didn't do this for me. He did it for all of us. And in that moment, with one man's testimony, one flash drive, and one silent courtroom, a wall of lies began to collapse in front of a watching nation. But before the room could even exhale, a new voice shattered the tension. Not from the bench, not from Jasmine, but from the back row. Calm, commanding, and carrying the full weight of federal law. The sudden break in silence was almost surreal, like a spotlight cutting across a theater at the exact moment the audience thinks the show has ended. The voice was measured, clear, unmistakable. Special Agent Daniel Kerrigan, FBI. The man who stood was tall, dressed in a crisp gray suit, his badge briefly visible beneath his coat. But it wasn't the badge that froze the room. It was the sentence that followed. Under the Homeland Security Integrity Protection Act, Judge Edward Chen is hereby taken into federal custody. He is under active investigation for conspiracy to commit treason and accepting illicit financial transfers from a foreign government. The words hit the courtroom like a brick through stained glass. There was no dramatic music, no gas from a movie soundtrack, just the collective breath of an entire nation being sucked out of the room. Reporters blinked in disbelief. Jasmine didn't flinch, but the judge, the man who had moments earlier declared someone else's citizenship void, sat frozen. Color drained from his face like ink washing off paper. His mouth opened for a moment as if searching for a sentence, a phrase, any kind of denial to hang on to, but none came. His lips moved slightly, as if caught between disbelief and collapse, but the muscles of authority had abandoned him. 2 agents in black suits emerged from opposite ends of the chamber. They moved in sync, not with urgency, but with quiet certainty, the kind that only comes from executing an arrest that had been planned long before this day. Every camera in the room shifted toward the bench. The red recording lights glowed brighter, and somewhere on the national broadcast feed, the words "Breaking Federal Judge Chen Arrested Live" began flashing on screens from New York to Nebraska. One of the agents approached from the left and carefully rested a hand on Chen's shoulder. Not forcefully, but firmly enough to signal that his time was over. The other agent unzipped a compact black case and pulled out a pair of federal-issued handcuffs. The metal glinted under the courtroom lights, polished and unforgiving. For a moment, it seemed even gravity paused to watch what happened next. Judge Edward Chen, Agent Kerrigan continued, voice even, almost clinical. You are being detained as part of an ongoing counterintelligence investigation concerning unauthorized financial relationships with international entities. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to legal counsel. If you choose to speak, your statements may be used against you. Chen didn't resist. He didn't protest. He didn't even blink. His shoulders slumped by half an inch, just enough to be noticed. As the agents gently guided him to stand, he swayed slightly, the motion betraying the collapse of everything he had built. Not over years, but over decades. The courtroom watched in dead silence as one agent pulled his arms behind his back and applied the cuffs. One click, then another, the steel locking into place like punctuation on a fallen empire. His black judicial robe shifted, bunched awkwardly behind his arms, no longer a symbol of prestige, but now just fabric, hanging loose on a man no longer in control of anything. The camera captured everything. No commercial break, no off-screen moment, just raw, relentless reality. Edward Chen was no longer a judge, no longer a shielded figure of authority. He was now a detainee. As the agents led him away from the bench, they didn't use the private exit behind the podium, the hidden door meant for judges and staff. They walked him straight down the center aisle, the same path used for criminal defendants, framed by the public and the press. Each step echoed off the marble floor with surgical precision, the click of leather soles and polished metal joining in rhythm. It wasn't loud, but it was final. Chen's head tilted downward. His eyes didn't scan the room. He didn't look at Jasmine. He didn't look at the audience. He didn't even look at the cameras. Maybe because he knew it was no longer his courtroom. Maybe because he knew that no amount of silence, no carefully rehearsed statement, no procedural loophole could stop what was coming next. And for the first time in hours, maybe in years, the room felt just a little bit heavier, not from chaos, not from shock, but from the weight of accountability finally landing where it belonged. In the back of the chamber, one reporter whispered to another without looking away, "This isn't a hearing anymore. This is history." And it was, because while Judge Edward Chen was marched out in handcuffs, past the crowd, past the press, past the very walls that once protected him, the world wasn't just watching a man fall, it was watching the system crack open. But Jasmine Crockett didn't just come to survive the fire. She came to build something new from the ashes. And before the walls of the courtroom even cooled, she was already preparing the next blow, not out of revenge, but for redemption, for the system, for the people it nearly crushed. The morning after Edward Chen's arrest, the nation was still reeling. Headlines screamed across every major network. Federal judge arrested for treason. Live. Cable panels burned through the night with speculation, legal analysis, and disbelief. But while others were still reacting, Jasmine was already moving. At 8:46 a.m., she stepped into the Capitol, wearing the same black blazer from the hearing, but now with a folder in her hand. Not a manila envelope of evidence. This time it was legislation, real, raw, and personal. Staffers paused as she passed. Some nodded. Some avoided eye contact. Everyone knew what this was. Jasmine Crockett wasn't coming to make a speech. She was about to rewrite federal oversight. By 9:03 a.m., standing before the full Judiciary Committee, she formally introduced it. Her voice was calm, her posture unshaken. The microphones hissed for a beat, and then she began. The Sovereignty and Justice Act of 2025 is not a symbolic gesture. It is the logical consequence of unchecked power. This is not vengeance. This is a structural correction, long overdue. The room listened, not because it was polite, but because the country was watching. Section 1 of the bill struck with surgical precision. All federal judges must disclose all foreign financial relationships, including offshore assets, international holdings, and consulting income. These disclosures must be made annually, under penalty of perjury and reviewed by a neutral auditing body, not internal ethics boards. She cited Chen's concealed $1.2 million transfer, the TikTok-related ruling, the secret coordination emails. When judges have secret deals with foreign financial entities, we no longer have a court. We have a compromised theater of justice. Her words didn't just land. They echoed. Section 2 turned the system on itself. Establish a new independent judicial oversight council composed of former judges, legal scholars, forensic accountants, and 3 rotating citizen jurors, nominated by the public, not politicians. The council's authority would extend to surprise audits, emergency recusals, and subpoena power, outside executive or legislative interference. A senator tried to interject. Jasmine didn't flinch. If the referees of democracy can't be challenged, she said, then the game was never fair to begin with. That quote would lead the evening news. Section 3 was the dagger. Ban any federal judge from presiding over cases where they, or their immediate family, stand to benefit financially, directly or indirectly. Any violation would result in immediate suspension pending investigation. She paused before reading that part, then spoke slowly. I stood in a courtroom and watched a man erase my rights while secretly enriching himself. That is not jurisprudence. That is institutional betrayal in black robes. By the end of her presentation, the room had shifted, not just politically, spiritually. Some senators stared down at their desks. Others tapped pens nervously. A few wiped their glasses. Within minutes, news outlets reported that 37 lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans, had requested copies of the bill. By hour 6, it had 52 co-sponsors. By hour 12, it had unanimous committee approval. By hour 24, it was scheduled for an emergency vote. And by hour 48, it passed. The final count, 92-8 in the Senate, 412-23 in the House. When the vote was announced, reporters stormed the corridor. Flashbulbs burst, microphones extended from every direction. Congresswoman Crockett, what do you say to critics who say this bill was rushed? She looked straight into the camera. No smile, no hesitation. Corruption doesn't need more time. It needs consequences, and it needs them now. She turned and walked away. The next morning, President Jacobson signed it into law. No ceremony, no delay. The pen hit paper at 7:32 a.m. The act took immediate effect. The Sovereignty and Justice Act of 2025 became the fastest passed federal ethics bill since Watergate. But more than a legislative win, it became a symbol. Law schools rewrote curriculum overnight. Judges filed emergency disclosures across the country. And on social media, the hashtag "No One Above the Robe" trended for 4 straight days. For Jasmine Crockett, though, it wasn't a celebration. It was a checkpoint. Later that night, she sat alone in her office. The lights were dimmed. Her blazer hung on the back of her chair. On her desk, beside the official copy of the bill, sat an old photograph, faded and bent. It was her and Danielle, 17 and laughing, long before the system showed its teeth. She ran a hand over the edge of the frame. Then, almost in a whisper, she said to herself, "One down." Because for her, this wasn't the end of a fight. It was just the first real punch that landed. And the system finally was starting to feel it. But Jasmine knew that real change didn't end when the ink dried on a bill. It began when the public believed in it. And if there was ever a moment to speak directly to the nation, not as a politician, not as a survivor, but as a citizen, it was now. The press conference was held on the Capitol steps at noon the following day. The air buzzed with heat and history. Camera cranes hung over the crowd like watchful eyes. Reporters packed every inch of the plaza. People gathered behind the barricades, spilling into sidewalks, standing on benches, climbing trees just to glimpse what they knew was no longer just a political moment. It was a reckoning. Jasmine Crockett stepped out from the west entrance, flanked by 2 aides and the staffers who had worked through the night drafting the language of the Sovereignty and Justice Act. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. Her face was composed, focused, like a soldier walking onto sacred ground. Her black jacket fluttered slightly in the breeze. The podium had already been set. The microphones blinked with red lights. Every major network was live. She placed her hands on the wood, paused and looked out, not just at the crowd, but into the lens of every camera. Her voice, when it came, was calm but carved from stone. I stand before you today not as a headline, not as a case study, and not as a warning. I stand here as proof. That truth, when spoken without apology, still has the power to crack even the highest walls. Flashbulbs popped like gunfire, but Jasmine didn't flinch. I was stripped of my rights by a man in a robe who thought silence would protect him. I was sentenced without trial, labeled a traitor without evidence, erased with the stroke of a gavel. But I'm still standing. The crowd stirred. Some gasped, some clapped, but most just listened. Still, breath held. This country was founded by rebels, not saints, people who stood up when they were told to sit down, who refused to obey injustice dressed in ceremony. So don't tell me citizenship is something that can be taken away behind closed doors by a man who forgot the Constitution the moment he put on a robe. Her hands tightened on the podium. Citizenship isn't paperwork. It's not a badge. It's not a luxury you earn if you behave. It's the birthright of everyone who builds this country, defends it, and holds it accountable. And it cannot be revoked by corruption disguised as law. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. A man near the back whispered, "Say that again." But Jasmine kept going. I watched a courtroom turn into a stage. I watched a federal judge sell justice to a foreign bank. And I watched how easy it is to destroy someone when the system lets the powerful operate without fear. Now she leaned forward. This was the moment. But we fixed that. We passed a bill. We dragged a lie into the light. And if you think that was the end of this fight, let me be clear. It was only the first round. The crowd was on edge, not in panic, but in hunger, in readiness. And then, without a script, without checking notes, she said the words that would be carved into walls, stitched onto protest banners, and quoted in courtrooms for years to come. Citizenship cannot be stripped by a robe. It is born from struggle and from truth. There was a beat of silence. Then the crowd erupted. Chants started immediately. No one above the robe! We are the people! Crockett! Crockett! The sound rose like a wave, a storm made of voices, shaking the Capitol dome itself. But Jasmine didn't raise her arms in triumph. She didn't smile. She simply stepped back from the podium and looked to the sky, as if she were searching for the echo of every voice that had ever been silenced in a courtroom. Reporters chased her as she walked off the steps. Microphones swarmed. Congresswoman Crockett, do you think this will lead to more investigations? Are there other judges compromised? What's your next move? She stopped only once, turned to face a young journalist, barely older than Danielle had been all those years ago, who asked the one question that truly mattered. Do you still believe in the system? Jasmine paused. Her answer didn't come quickly. I believe in the people who refuse to let the system forget who it serves. Then she turned and kept walking. By sunset, her quote was everywhere. CNN ran it on loop with the headline, "The 21st Century Gettysburg Address?" MSNBC aired an hour-long special called Born from Struggle, The Rise of Jasmine Crockett. Fox News tried to spin it, but even their anchors admitted the speech had struck a chord no smear could erase. The next morning, students marched in 5 cities holding signs that read, "Truth wears no robe." Law professors debated whether Crockett's reforms could signal a shift toward third-party judicial accountability. Civil rights groups launched initiatives named after her. Public defenders across the country wore pins with her quote engraved. But the biggest impact came where it mattered most, in courtrooms. Judges began recusing themselves voluntarily from cases with financial overlap. State legislatures drafted local versions of the Sovereignty and Justice Act. And a coalition of lawyers filed the largest class action suit in federal history, demanding post-conviction reviews of thousands of cases tied to previously undisclosed judicial conflicts. Change had begun, and it began not with a bill, not with a scandal, but with one sentence. Citizenship cannot be stripped by a robe. It is born from struggle and from truth. But sometimes a sentence doesn't just end a speech, it starts a movement. And as Jasmine Crockett walked off those Capitol steps, her words didn't fade into the noise. They ignited something, something bigger than legislation, something you can't unsee, unhear, or undo. The streets were the first to answer. Within 24 hours of the press conference, rallies broke out in cities across the country. It began with a few hundred in Washington Square Park. Students, veterans, union workers, even federal employees off duty. They held handwritten signs. Citizenship is not conditional. We are not yours to silence. And most strikingly, truth greater than robes. By sundown, they were thousands strong, spilling into streets, shutting down traffic, marching not in anger, but in warning. By the weekend, the numbers swelled into the tens of thousands. From Boston to Phoenix, San Diego to Chicago, people gathered outside courthouses and Capitol buildings. They chanted Jasmine's words like scripture. Speakers climbed steps with bullhorns. Giant LED screens played the moment Chen was cuffed and led away. The image of a federal judge, once untouchable, now accountable, became the viral symbol of a new era. It wasn't just about Jasmine anymore. It was about every case that had ever felt rigged. Every name misspelled, every voice ignored. This wasn't just protest. This was national recalibration. News helicopters hovered. Drones buzzed over crowds. In Los Angeles, the crowd outside the federal building reached 40,000. Completely peaceful, yet completely unignorable. One by one, district attorneys released statements affirming their commitment to reviewing past rulings for potential bias or conflict. Judges across the country began proactively disclosing financial ties. Some even recused themselves voluntarily from cases they had been expected to oversee for months. The legal system, long known for moving slowly, had just been shoved into motion by public will. And then the classrooms answered. At Georgetown Law, Professor Rachel Mead tore up her entire syllabus. On Monday morning, her students walked into a lecture hall with one phrase projected onto the wall: V. Crockett, 2025. No one asked what it meant. Everyone already knew. By that afternoon, Harvard, Yale, NYU, UC Berkeley, and Howard University had all announced an emergency integration of the Crockett versus Chen case into their constitutional ethics courses. It wasn't just law students studying it. Schools of journalism, public policy, and even digital forensics added modules dissecting how corruption moved through legal systems undetected and how it finally collapsed. At Columbia, a packed auditorium watched the entire 2-hour hearing replayed on the big screen. Jasmine's silent resistance, her 122nd request. The moment Chen's face froze when the email was read aloud. Students didn't take notes. They held their breath. Because this wasn't history, it was a live reckoning. Soon, law professors began publishing peer-reviewed papers analyzing the Sovereignty and Justice Act clause by clause. Legal podcasts exploded in popularity overnight, explaining the finer points of judicial recusal, foreign influence monitoring, and ethics reform. Hashtags turned into movements. Movements turned into seminars. And somewhere in the middle of it all, one reality took root across academia. This wasn't a one-off scandal. This was a case study in civic resilience. The American Bar Association released an unprecedented statement, not just praising the reform, but acknowledging institutional failure. We must admit, it read, that the integrity of the judiciary has been compromised by a lack of transparency and public accountability. The Crockett-Chen incident reminds us that silence is complicity. Within weeks, the ABA announced new continuing education requirements for sitting judges, focused entirely on ethical review and international compliance. And while the streets marched and the schools taught, Congress acted. 6 weeks after the initial hearing, the Sovereignty and Justice Act of 2025 was placed on the president's desk for signing. The legislative path had been nothing short of revolutionary. Hearings were expedited. Amendments were limited. Lobbyists tried and failed to slow it down. The public outcry had become too loud. The media coverage too relentless. Lawmakers who had once scoffed at ethics bills now rushed to co-sponsor. Because votes weren't just being counted, they were being watched. At 9:17 a.m. on a bright April morning, President Jacobson stepped into the East Room of the White House. This time, the signing was not done in private. It was televised, no curtains drawn, no photo ops for select media. Instead, it was streamed to classrooms, played in real time on courthouse monitors, and shown on jumbotrons in public squares nationwide. Jasmine stood behind him, flanked by veterans, teachers, a public defender from Detroit, a high school senior from Tulsa, and a retired judge who had openly supported the bill. The pen touched the paper, and in that moment, America didn't just get a new law, it got a new standard. The Sovereignty and Justice Act of 2025 became the fastest passed ethics legislation in modern U.S. history. But more than that, it became a cultural firewall, a line that future generations would look back on and say, that's where it changed. Even late-night hosts, who usually joked through the headlines, spoke with unusual gravity. One monologue opened not with a punchline, but a quote. Citizenship isn't something the powerful give us. It's a right we're born with, and no one gets to take it without a fight. The crowd didn't laugh. They applauded. Across the country, murals began appearing. In Atlanta, a 20-foot painting of Jasmine Crockett standing against a collapsing column of gavels. In Detroit, a depiction of a courtroom mid-explosion with scrolls of legislation flying from the rubble. In Oakland, a softer portrait, Jasmine placing a hand over Danielle's shoulder, both of them staring at the Capitol as it shimmered in the distance. Within the federal court system itself, something even more extraordinary happened. A dozen judges resigned, not from scandal, but from shame. Some issued letters to their districts citing a misalignment of values with modern judicial expectations. Others stepped down quietly, avoiding further scrutiny. Meanwhile, a new generation of nominees, vetted under transparency protocols introduced by the Act, stepped into the light. People who had spent their careers in public defense, civil rights, and grassroots organizing. The bench was changing, and America saw it. And somewhere in Fort Worth, a woman named Danielle watched it all from her living room. She wasn't in the spotlight. She didn't speak to the press. But she kept one photo framed on her shelf, two teenagers laughing on a rooftop. Below it, she had taped a handwritten line. We're still here. Because in the end, that's what the Crockett versus Chen case became. Not a scandal, not a hearing, not even a legislative victory. It became a symbol that even in a nation bruised by its own systems, one voice told at the right time, in the right place, with truth too sharp to ignore, can change everything. But for all the legislation passed, marches walked, and cameras that rolled, the deepest lesson wasn't one that could be written into law. It was something quieter, heavier, a truth that haunted Jasmine Crockett long after the microphones turned off and the streets grew silent. Justice, it turned out, wasn't about punishment, not entirely. It wasn't about how many years a man like Edward Chen would face, or how loud the headlines could scream his downfall. Those were outcomes, repercussions, necessary, yes, but not the soul of what mattered. Because at its core, justice was about recognition, about the invisible finally being seen, the unheard finally being believed. And for Jasmine Crockett, the most painful part of her journey wasn't when she was stripped of her rights. It was how easy it was for those in power to do it, and how long it might have taken to undo if she hadn't fought back. What she came to understand, what America was beginning to understand, was that injustice doesn't always wear the face of a villain. Sometimes it speaks in the voice of protocol. It hides behind marble columns, it wears a robe, and it smiles while it erases you. The real danger was never the blunt force of tyranny. It was the quiet normalization of erasure. Jasmine remembered that icy center again. Not the guard, not even the denial, but the look on Danielle's face when she whispered, "I don't feel real anymore." That line was no longer just a memory. It had become a warning label for every institution that forgot the humanity of the people it was designed to serve. Because when a system makes someone feel invisible, it's not just a failure of law, it's a failure of soul. She'd seen it too many times. A teenage boy accused with no lawyer present, a mother deported over a typo, a veteran denied care because of a clerical error. They didn't make the news, they didn't have hashtags, but they were real, and they were dying in silence. What the Crockett versus Chen case revealed wasn't just corruption. It revealed how close the line truly was between a citizen and an outcast. It showed that in a nation built on laws, laws themselves could be weaponized against the people they were meant to protect. It taught America that democracy isn't just fragile, it's conditional, and the condition is vigilance. But the lesson didn't end in fear, it ended in resolve. Because for every closed door Jasmine had ever faced, she now kicked one open. For every time someone told her she didn't belong, she wrote policy that made sure the next girl who looked like her would belong. Not because the system allowed it, but because she demanded it. And yet, even in triumph, she never forgot the cost. In private moments, she would still find herself wondering, how many people didn't get the chance to stand up? How many were swallowed by systems without ever being named? The thought tormented her, but it also fueled her, because if her voice could carry even one name back from the void, if her spotlight could pull even one person out of the shadows, then the fight was worth every second. In one of her final interviews before Congress recessed that spring, a journalist asked her, "What's the one thing you want people to remember from all this?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "That silence," she said, "is never neutral." That line became the foundation of an entire school campaign, printed on walls, stamped into notebooks, repeated in assemblies. Silence is never neutral. It became a call not just to speak out, but to listen differently, to stop dismissing quiet suffering as the price of order. Because when someone says, "I don't feel real," we cannot afford to wait until the cameras arrive. The deeper humanitarian lesson then wasn't just about government. It was about culture, about how easy it is to believe that pain only matters when it's loud. But most pain isn't loud. It's buried. It's folded into late shifts at gas stations, into wrong names on court dockets, into the quiet refusal of access that feels too polite to fight. Jasmine's story was dramatic, but its power came from what it revealed about the undramatic stories, the ones that didn't end in a federal arrest or a law passed in record time, the ones that end in silence. She made a promise not just to change systems, but to remind America that its strength doesn't come from power. It comes from its memory, the ability to remember who we are when no one is watching, the ability to hold empathy even when it's inconvenient, the ability to say, "This is wrong," even when the paperwork is signed, even when the gavel falls. She taught us that a courtroom isn't sacred because of its architecture. It's sacred only if it protects the people who walk into it, and that no title, no robe, no bench should ever be above the truth. But most of all, Jasmine Crockett taught us that the most radical act in a world trained to forget is to remember. And now, because of her, America does. But what good is a lesson if it dies in the classroom? What's the point of truth if it's never turned into movement? Jasmine knew that her story, no matter how powerful, would mean nothing if people went back to sleep. And so she called them to rise. This wasn't just about one judge or one courtroom. This was about every citizen who's ever been silenced, erased, or mislabeled, and about every one of us who stood by, thinking justice was someone else's fight. Jasmine Crockett didn't ask for applause. She demanded accountability. On the Capitol steps, with the camera still rolling and the echoes of her final speech bouncing off of stone pillars, she pointed beyond the microphones, to the people. "Don't wait for a courtroom to become your battlefield," she said. "Don't wait until your rights are on the line to care. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. And if we don't fight for each other, who will?" She didn't ask America to be perfect. She asked it to be present, to show up in city council meetings, to demand transparency in local courts, to vote not just for charisma, but for integrity, to read the fine print before handing over their consent. Her voice didn't shake. It cut through the noise with the precision of someone who knew what it was like to be dismissed. "Stand up before it's you," she warned. "Stand up before it's too late." She didn't want fans. She wanted fighters. Neighbors who would refuse to turn away, teachers who would name the injustice, students who would organize, journalists who would dig deeper, everyday people who would refuse to be ruled by convenience. Because democracy was never meant to be a spectator sport, and citizenship wasn't a status. It was a responsibility. Jasmine didn't walk out of that courtroom just to reclaim her name. She walked out so no one else would have to fight the same war alone. So if you're reading this, hearing this, feeling this, don't scroll past. Don't wait for permission. This is your country. This is your call. Answer it. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.